Thank you, Gia. Good morning. So, years ago, I was at the Comedy Store in West Hollywood, and there was a stand-up comic who was going on this tirade about the latest fad that everyone was getting into about throwing surprise parties. And she was saying, people are finding any excuse to throw a surprise party, whether it makes sense or not. And she went on to explain that a friend of hers had decided to throw a surprise party for her baby girl's first birthday. She said, I kid you not. We were all asked to gather very quietly in the living room while our hostess put the baby to sleep for her afternoon nap. And as soon as she fell asleep, we were instructed to get on our hands and knees and crawl quietly into the room to gather around the crib. And then when our hostess gave us a signal, we all jumped up and yelled, "Surprise!" She was surprised. She said, I think that's the only one-year-old I know of who's in therapy. So, today, I'm looking at the idea of going with the deeper flow, which if you haven't figured it out, I'm playing off the saying that we hear all the time. We're encouraged to just go with the flow. Go with the flow, right? Go with the flow and life would be so much better. And I say, as a Science of Mind minister, it's my duty to bring it to your awareness that we should ask, what flow am I going with? The flow of, well, everyone's throwing a surprise party, therefore I should, for any reason whatsoever. The flow of us versus them thinking that we see so prevalent these days. What others expect us to do. This is how things are supposed to be. Is that the kind of mindset, the flow that we want to go along with? Because I think it's really not uncommon, like the person who would throw a surprise party for a one-year-old, for us to lose sight of the deeper intention behind the actions that we take, the deeper impulse of God in us that's greater than sometimes the thought patterns and beliefs that we get caught up in, that we forget sometimes the purpose behind some of the things that we do. And what I love about Science of Mind and New Thought teachings is that we emphasize that where we have the greatest dominion is with our own consciousness, with our own thoughts and beliefs and perceptions and what we think, which affects how we behave. And we do not need to go along with the tendency of the majority because everyone else thinks this way. Because in my culture, this is what we were taught to believe. Because in my home, this is how we think. We can become conscious of what's driving our perceptions, what's driving our actions. And if it doesn't really support the greater good, a greater experience of life for ourselves and others, we can question and we can change those patterns. We don't have to go along with them. In this holiday season, I think it's particularly significant, that this is a season where we have a lot of traditions that we've developed that we're used to repeating over and over again, and that are there to help us have an experience of greater love and light, with Hanukkah being in 2 days, celebrating the miracle of the light, of joy, of generosity, of all these different qualities of God. And how often do we get caught up in all that we have to do and it has to be like before, that actually don't create the experience of the underlying intention of what the holidays really represent. So, speaking about my vacation in France this past September, you knew it was coming, right? that's actually where I got the inspiration for this talk, because aside from, of course, spending time in Paris, my second home, and Joe and I just having such a great time there, we also went back to a region called the Dordogne, or it's also known as the Périgord region of France, where they discovered the prehistoric caves with the prehistoric paintings. We had fallen in love with it years ago and wanted to go back, so some friends joined us for a week in that beautiful region. And on our last day, it was a beautiful sunny day, blue sky, and we had the incredible experience of kayaking down the Dordogne River, in this setting with beautiful scenery, these cliffside villages, little chateaus perched on cliffs. It's like, is this for real, right? And I noticed as we're moving along that we were moving in the general direction of the flow of the river. But as we were going down, I noticed that although there is a general flow in one direction, every now and then we would notice these little eddies, these swirls of water that weren't necessarily going in the direction of the water. If the water was bumping up against, maybe a rock or something that was protruding, that it actually would splash back sometimes in opposite direction of the general flow. And I really noticed that as new kayakers, if we didn't get our movements with the oars in sync, that we could create very, very creative flows that were absolutely not in the direction of the river and go in directions where we had no intention of going. Well, I'd like to draw a parallel to that, to the idea that we emphasize over and over in our teaching, that God's nature is fully and equally present in every moment, in every one of us, in every situation. And we feel that nature in us as this impulse to feel good, right? Every moment, there's some impulse to experience and express goodness in our lives. And that's God's nature seeking expression through us. And as finite expressions of this one, we would be like the little ripples of water on the surface it's always changing, but each one has its own little shape, and then it takes on another shape. And that would be just all the different ways that Spirit keeps reshaping itself in us and through our lives. And because part of that nature of God is free will, we have the freedom to think that we are separate from God's nature, to think that we are separate from one another, and to then create patterns of life, of expression out here that don't look like God's nature at all. But the truth is, whether or not we are behaving in a way that is in alignment with our true nature of love and joy and generosity and abundance, whether or not we're behaving that way, the underlying nature, that flow of goodness, is always there. We always feel it as that desire to feel good. Now, what we know is that because all life is interconnected, that these different shapes of ripples on the water are still all imbued with the same nature of water, right? And they're all eventually moving in the same direction toward a greater good. The highest version, what I would call the deeper flow, would be good that is for all and against none. That's the deepest intention of God. Ernest Holmes, our founder, basically told us that when we have a desire for something, he said, if it represents a greater experience of life with no intent to harm anyone, go for it. That's the nature of love. That's the nature of God. But on the surface, at our ego level, if we're feeling separate from God and separate from one another, then the you versus me thinking can create patterns that don't look like that divine nature. And yet, all it takes is for us to recognize where we're out of alignment and to turn within, to reconnect with that essence of God's nature in us, to then move in a different direction. When we recognize that our actions are out of alignment with the underlying intention of God for good for all, we can step back, and we can tap into that flow of love, forgiveness, generosity, peace, you name it. It lies within us all the time. We can then move in directions that represent that. And that's what our spiritual practices support us in doing, because if we have a regular practice, we are turning inward and communing with that essence of our being, with that spirit within. If we are doing our prayers and meditation and affirmations, if we are working with our practitioners, being of service, all of these things are things to keep us in alignment with that spiritual nature, so we're more likely to catch ourselves when we're moving in a different direction. Every step of our human evolution where the status quo has been changed to make room for greater love, greater freedom, greater understanding, greater justice, all of that has come out of individuals who felt the deeper flow of God's unconditional love for all than the surface flow of, but this is just the way it is, and this is how we think here, and this is how it has to be. When we're willing to cross-examine our beliefs and our actions and challenge the rules that we live by, then we're more open to seeing those that don't support us, those that don't support the higher good, change them and bring greater good into our lives and into the world. So my dad, for years, taught political science. He was a political science professor up at the University of British Columbia. And that university also has an agriculture department. And I remember hearing a story about a student. He was an economics major. And he needed to sign up for some classes outside of his major. And he had heard about a class in the agriculture department that was interesting, that was pretty easy. It was a beginning level. He thought, okay, that sounds like fun. So he signed up for that class. He was finding when he went to the class, it wasn't quite as easy as people had told him it was. And then when he went to take the midterm exam, he realized that there were questions on there that they had never covered that material. He didn't know where these questions were coming from. And he later found out he had signed up for the wrong class. He had signed up for a much more advanced class that assumed that you had taken certain prerequisites, which he had not. And so he went to the professor and to the administration to just see if they could make arrangements for him to drop the class, maybe pick something else up, get caught up, but something where he had a better chance of passing. And the rule was absolutely not. Time had gone by that you could not change or drop a class after a certain period of time, and they weren't going to, vary from that rule. So he decided he had to figure out a way to deal with it. And he decided, quite maturely, I think, that, well, maybe I just won't make a big deal of passing and failing. Maybe I'll just remember why I'm here is to learn. I'll go to classes. Maybe I don't have to go to every class now if my schedule is really busy. I'll just go periodically, learn what I can. I'll go take the final exam, not worry about if I fail it, just do as well as I can. And so that's what he did. And the day of the final exam, as he suspected, there were many questions that he had absolutely no clue. He couldn't even begin to formulate an answer. He was surprised that in some cases he'd actually picked stuff up where he could answer the question. And then in some cases he decided, well, maybe I can offer an idea, think it through and see where that goes. So he came to the question, why is lightning good for agriculture? Now, the reason it's good for agriculture is because when there are lightning storms, it breaks up the nitrogen in the air that plants can't absorb, but that they need, and it puts it down into the earth so they can absorb it through the soil. So it nourishes the plants. He had no idea about this, of course. But he thought, I should be able to come up with some kind of a creative answer to this, right? So he thought about it, and then he came up with the best answer he could provide, and decided to just commit to it and put it down on paper. So when the professor looked at his final exam, he saw the answer, lightning is good for agriculture because it scares the crap out of the cows. The professor laughed so hard when he saw that. It made the rounds of the entire department, and having that experience of laughing and stepping out of, the norm, the professors got to thinking about, well, wait a second, what's our whole purpose for being here? It's to educate people. This guy made an honest mistake. He tried to correct it, and we're hiding behind this is the rule. And so that laughter pulled them out of the status quo, and they felt the deeper flow of what they were there to do, and they decided to let him basically drop the class where it wouldn't impact his grade point average one way or another and make it up in the next term with a different class. So, again, when we go with the deeper flow, we can find the outer action that supports that deeper intention. And I'd like to tie this back to this holiday season, to this season that has these themes of gratitude and love, discovering and sharing our inner light, generosity, peace, new beginnings. All of these themes that run through the holidays that are the deeper flow, that show up on the surface as traditions that we become accustomed to. Maybe certain family gatherings and gift exchanges, spiritual rituals. Those are all the surface flow experiences. And these are always changing, because this is what's happening in the world, and situations in the world are constantly in a state of flux. So because things change in the world, maybe loved ones that we're used to gathering with are no longer here with us. Maybe our finances aren't the same in the past. Maybe the gathering places that we're used to gathering are no longer available to us. Based on what's happened in this area in the past week, we can only imagine what some people are facing, like their homes aren't even going to be there. People have lost their lives and loved ones during this time, and yet we're going into this holiday season. Should they not feel like they can be a part of it? It's not surprising, I think, that many people feel out of sorts, out of place in the holidays. Not surprising that it's a time where a lot of people get depressed because the conditions in their lives don't match the outer picture of what we traditionally imagine for the holidays. But what I'd like to remind us all of is that whatever our conditions, nothing in the world can rob us of our capacity to love, to express generosity. I don't care what your finances are, you can express generosity by being generous with your compliments, with little acts of kindness, right? That's generosity. There are ways we can always experience and express peace. But just like we might have to dip our hand deeper into the water to be able to feel the flow, the deeper flow of the river, sometimes we have to dip deeper into our spiritual essence to remember these qualities that we associate with the holidays, that they're right there, and to find the appropriate ways that we can experience them now, not some next holiday. So what I'd like to invite us to do today is to pick one quality of God, just one quality of God that you would most like to experience and see expressed around this holiday season. And whatever that is, take time every day to just get still and feel the vibration of that quality of God in you, because it's always there. As our founder, Ernest Holmes, said to us, we do a lot of affirmations to affirm the truth of spirit within us, but it's not the words that we say, it's the feeling. When we feel that love, that joy, that beauty in us, that's what opens us up to new ways to experience it outwardly. So sit with that feeling and then remind yourself, I am a vessel of God's, whatever that quality is that you've chosen. I am a vessel of God's, and then you say the quality. And then look for every opportunity you may have to express it. And don't judge it as too big or too small. Just look for any way to express love or joy or beauty, whatever it is. You'll always be able to find a way. There's always a way to express these qualities. And so, if the holidays are looking the way you like them to look, if they're shaping up in the way you would love them to shape up, that's wonderful, because this practice will magnify that even more. And if they're not, this practice will help you to realize that there is a way for you to experience the holiday spirit no matter what. No one can take that away from you. And so I'd like us, before we go into prayer, to just work with the quality of love, because I think right now our caring for all those who have been affected in our own communities and our neighboring communities, that's a vibration of love. So I'm just going to ask you to get still and just feel that vibration of caring, that vibration of love, and extend it out to all those who might be living in chaos or fear. And just know, because we're interconnected, that they can feel it. Feel that and say with me, I am a vessel of God's love. Please say that. I am a vessel of God's love. Again, I am a vessel of God's love. One more time. I am a vessel of God's love. And I say to you, yes, you are. And let's go with that deeper flow. Let's pray. So as we turn our attention inward, I just feel that energy of love, that presence that is always seeking an experience of good, of joy, of love, of beauty, of wholeness, of abundance. That is the vibration of God's life, God's love. That is the very essence out of which everything is created, and that lives in, through, and as all that is. And so as we come together and remember this truth in this moment, I know that we are open to seeing how that love, that goodness of God can absolutely be experienced and expressed in new ways through us as we move through this holiday season. That there's always a way for us to be the spirit of the holidays and to share it with others. And so I know that as we come together with this intention and we allow this prayer to be a prayer for all those who are faced with circumstances that look unlike God's nature, we know right here, right now, that God is right there. And that somehow out of this, God is revealed in new ways in all these situations.